When a crime happens between people who love each other, we expect it to make sense in the end. A moment we can point to, a clear break where everything changed. But sometimes that moment never comes. The evidence tells us what happened. The verdict tells us who is responsible. But the why is never fully understood. This is one of those cases. A case that unfolded inside a home between a mother and son and ended in a quiet bedroom by a lake. On July 13th, 2019, in Inverness, Florida, the lake outside the Hallowell home was still. The kind of stillness that makes everything feel peaceful, even when it wasn't. That afternoon, 57-year-old Denise went to her bedroom to take a nap after being out for the day. Hours later, she was found with an axe embedded 3/4 of the way into the back of her head. The horrific discovery was reported by her son Carlos, her son, who called 911 and told dispatchers he'd just found her unresponsive.
911, what is the address of the emergency?
I need someone fast. Get on the phone with me and take a deep breath and calm down so we can get this information. Do you think she's beyond any help?
When first responders arrived on the scene, Denise was still alive, gasping for air, but the injury to her head was catastrophic and she couldn't be saved. Initially, there was no clear indication on how or why this had happened, but what initially appeared consistent with an intruder attack would slowly become something else entirely. From the beginning, Carlos gave investigators a clear and detailed timelines of the events leading up to his horrific discovery. Earlier that day, he said he'd gone with his mom to a funeral and that they stopped for some pie afterward, something he said was a tradition between them. When they got back home, he said they changed and went to their separate bedrooms to take a nap. It was a story that sounded ordinary enough on the surface, until investigators began testing the details.
We both went to our separate rooms to take our naps for the day, which is what we normally do. And then about a couple hours later, I don't remember the time, I hear barking from my side of the house, which is abnormal. Our dogs are supposed to be in that little fenced-in area. So I walk out to the front door. My mom's door is closed as always, but she does let the dogs out every now and then while she's taking a nap to just let them go to the bathroom. So the front door was wide open. I figured she might have forgotten to close it, and I looked outside. Our dog, the 2 green gates that you guys walk through, completely open. Every now and then my mom sometimes does that. She's getting older and she forgets things very easily now. She was. So went to go find the dogs, checked around the property looking for them. I couldn't find them, so I went to go wake my mom up to help me find them, and then I found her there.
This was the foundation of Carlos's story, and at that point, his account had done 2 things at once. Explained how Denise was found, and suggested someone may have entered the property while both of them were asleep. A normal afternoon, a routine nap, dogs getting loose, followed by an unimaginable discovery. And even in this early version, there are small details investigators begin to pay attention to. Because in cases like this, small details don't stay small for long. As detectives worked to understand what had happened that day, they also began to look closely at the relationships within the home. Denise Hallowell was a special education teacher who adopted Carlos as a young child from Guatemala, and later, another boy from Honduras named Angel. Years later, there had been serious allegations. After running away from home, Angel told Child Protection Services Denise had been abusive. He told them he'd been regularly locked inside his bedroom, that his windows were nailed shut, and that he'd been forced to go to the washroom in a bucket. But Denise claimed those steps were meant to keep him safe during episodes of intense anger and repeated attempts to run away. In the end, Denise was never formally charged, but both boys were removed from the home. Later, Carlos would return, but Angel wouldn't. And although Carlos defended his mom through the allegations, the impact on his family was far from over. The home had changed, the trust inside it, and whatever stability once existed had been damaged. By 2019, the relationship between Denise and Carlos had also become strained, with arguments about his grades, spending too much time with girls, and about money. And some neighbors had a front row seat to the conflict. Stephanie Irving, who'd spent time around Denise and Carlos, would later describe a moment that stayed with her.
Like, Denise was bashing Carlos. Do you know that Carlos wrecked a $15,000 truck? And do you know that I said, he didn't wreck a $15,000 truck. He tried to kill himself. There's a big difference, Denise. And I said this because he was crying. And he was like, man, you kicked me out. You kicked me out. Why would you kick me out when I needed you most? I just tried to kill myself, and you told me I had to leave. Like, wouldn't even hug him, wouldn't acknowledge the tears. It was really bizarre.
That dynamic, conflict, distance, emotional volatility, is something investigators would later have to weigh alongside the physical evidence. But at this point, they were still working on multiple possibilities, including the idea that someone else could have entered the home. If Carlos's account was true, then that meant someone had entered the property, attacked Denise in her bedroom, removed multiple devices from the home, and then disappeared without leaving any obvious signs of a forced entry. Investigators needed to know if that was even possible. The scene itself would help answer that. Back at the house, investigators had been working the scene. What they found were no signs of forced entry, and no indication that anyone had broken in. And after a thorough search of the area, investigators reported no evidence indicating an outside intruder had been on the property. But a search of the lake proved more promising. 3 security cameras and Denise's cell phone. All of them had been removed from the home and were later recovered from the lake. The question was, by whom? Due to water damage, investigators were unable to recover usable footage from the devices, so investigators turned next to Carlos's phone. Using phone records, GPS data, and digital activity, investigators reconstructed a timeline of that afternoon. And according to that reconstruction, Carlos's phone had remained active during the entire afternoon, including during the time he'd said he'd been asleep. The data also showed movement between the house and the lake during that time. When the call to 911 was placed, investigators learned the phone's location appeared to be down by the lake, not where Carlos said he'd been. It was the first hard contradiction in his story, and from that point forward, investigators weren't just examining the scene. They were beginning to test Carlos's version of events against his digital trail. As investigators dug deeper, they began building a clear picture of Carlos's life leading up to July 2019. And according to the people around him, he appeared to have been struggling. People described substance use, conflict at school, and increasingly volatile arguments at home. At one point, he'd even been removed from a Christian school. After tensions at home escalated, Carlos had spent time living with Stephanie and Damien Irving, family friends who witnessed his behavior spiraling.
So when he lived with us the first time, he had just overdosed, tried to commit suicide again. So he was in the hospital, and when he was discharged on medicine for bipolar disorder. And I'm telling you, that medicine worked, okay? It took him from like so anxious it made you uncomfortable. You could feel his anxiety to he became more calm, more rational, more easy to talk to. Like he didn't get so angry.
But according to those around him, that stability didn't last long. People around him believed he'd stopped taking his medication, and whatever calm that period had briefly created seemed to give way to more instability.
Found Carlos's medicine, which apparently he stopped taking, and upon opening his Prozac here, there is a gross white blob substance in the bottle of liquid. He's either not taking his Prozac or he's turned it into something else to take.
By the summer of 2019, the relationship between Denise and Carlos had reached a breaking point. According to multiple accounts, their arguments had become frequent and intense. In one recorded argument, you can hear the core conflict underneath so many of their fights: money, control, and Carlos' insistence that Denise still treated him like a child.
When you know he doesn't have a job, why are you asking him for money? He has a job. He told me he has a job with you guys.
Oh,
He's
before
gone
that
all the
he
time
didn't.
working.
And you were harassing. How much was she originally saying you
He's
owed?
gone
Like $600
all
or
the
something?
time working.
Well, we have to come up with, now I gotta come up with breaks paying for something.
No.
Why is that my fault?
Shut up!
Why is he paying for breaks?
Shut up and I'll
Then you have all
answer.
this money.
Shut up!
You brag your
What
right
did I
about
tell
it.
you today?
I don't know, you said pay the phone bill, and then you're gonna
Why
charge.
does he have to pay a phone bill?
Because it's
He's
his
a
phone.
child.
There you go. She sees you as a child. All you scream and want to be seen as an adult.
No,
No,
I said I
he
want to
says
be
he's a child.
treated. I said I want to be treated as
Teenager.
my age.
You're the
Sorry.
one that keeps calling him an adult.
I've recorded you. They've
So-
heard you
So
talk.
we've got you now.
Right.
You barged into their house. They've
So?
seen you talk, and now Stephanie's seeing how you talk to me.
No, I don't care.
These recordings captured something important. Not just conflict, but a relationship that was no longer containing that conflict in a healthy way. And in the weeks leading up to Denise's death, that instability appeared to be getting worse. Some people close to Denise later described something else: concern. Not just about arguments, but about safety. And some of Denise's friends would later describe what they believed were warning signs that the conflict had already turned physical.
I said to her, I said, please tell me the truth. I said, did he do that to you? No, I fell. I said, please tell me the truth. She would never admit it to me, but apparently she admitted it to Peggy, that he pushed her, and she did fall, but he pushed her. And then she ended up with a broken wrist and the other arm as well, and a concussion.
Whether Denise fully admitted what had happened or not, the people around her said they were beginning to worry the conflict with Carlos had crossed into something more dangerous than arguments. By then, the possibility of serious harm no longer felt abstract to them. In the days after Denise was killed, people around Carlos began to notice something else: his behavior.
Talked to Ron, my husband, and said he did not seem sad. He was upset, but I didn't hear the sadness, and I was surprised at that.
To some, it didn't feel like grief. It felt like his attention had already moved somewhere else. And for investigators, behavior like that became one part of a much larger picture they were beginning to build.
Then kept saying, that his mom has a few acres in a couple other states. I don't know if that's true or not. But he said when he turns 18, he was probably going to move to one of them in North Carolina. But he's like, yeah, man, you know, it sucks what happened, but, you know, I can't wait to get that as far as, like, the land and the cars and all that stuff. And he also had, like, no remorse. He had no problem telling me whatever.
Investigators now had a timeline, phone data, and people's accounts of the mother and son relationship. Next would be Carlos's own statements, slowly changing under pressure. By the time detectives sat down with Carlos again, they weren't just looking for inconsistencies. They wanted to know whether his story could withstand comparison with the evidence. Two months later, Carlos was brought in for questioning, and at first, he maintained the same version of events.
What did you do after that when you saw her?
I shook her, like yelling, "Mom, mom, 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 mom." Wake up.
She was laying, so when you walk in the room, her back was towards you?
Yes.
And how did you shake her? Like
right on the side, like
on her ribs or something like that?
Yeah, where her arm was laying down like that, just, "Mom, you awake," and I could see blood running down her nose, but I could hear her still breathing.
That was the only time you touched her?
Correct.
You didn't like run around the room a few thousand times?
No,
you just
no.
Ran in, shook her, I'll be back?
Yeah, as soon as I ran in and I heard her still breathing, I thought there could be a chance. I ran straight to my room, grabbed my phone, ran outside, called, and then she instructed me to stay outside.
But what begins as routine questioning doesn't stay that way for long.
But I didn't do anything and would never do anything to my mother like that. As much as we used to bicker and get back at each other, fighting sometimes, and then peace, and then back and forth, and then peace again, never. Never in a million years would I ever think to do that. She's my mom. I was adopted at age 4, and I've been with her forever.
Yeah.
Would never do such a thing like that. And if you're insinuating that, I'm very offended by that.
You're putting on a pretty good show.
A show?
Yeah, you're putting on a really good show.
A show?
Yeah.
How's this a show?
This is where the conversation stops feeling procedural and starts becoming confrontational. Because by this point, investigators were no longer gathering his version of events. They were testing it against the evidence they'd already collected.
And I remember that CPT talking about how your attitude of things were very sociopathic.
Sociopathic?
Which is exactly what you're showing me right now. And you're trying to act like you're upset about something.
Trying?
Yeah.
Okay, how is this trying? That was my mom. My mother.
Right.
So trying, how is this trying?
Because you don't feel like normal people feel.
I don't feel like normal people feel.
Yeah, that's what a sociopath has the issues with.
Okay, so you're calling me a sociopath?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. This is what sociopaths do.
Well, do what?
I've just been sizing you up the whole time. And
okay.
It's like 100%.
Okay, you can size me up.
You don't have normal feelings.
You can size me up all you want. I do have normal feelings. I loved my mom. Ask anybody in this county. They can attest to that.
Do you think that people that love one another don't do the most extreme things to them?
Not like that, no.
It happens all the time, every day.
No.
That's what I just told you earlier, that it's usually like a loved one.
Okay, I would not do that. You ask anybody in this county. My mom and I were amazing. We would never do such a thing like that to each other at all. My mom would never hurt me like that, and I would never hurt her. You call me a sociopath or whatever you want. And I'm sorry for getting upset. But you please ask around. Ask anybody.
We're going to ask everybody.
Ask everybody. They will attest that I would never do that.
And I don't know what kind of son you were to her.
I loved her very much.
But we're going to peel this orange way back and look in nitty-gritty details.
Please. You can, and you'll find that I would never do this. I don't know who
the evidence is going to show us something.
Okay, that's fine, but I would not do this to my own mother.
At this point, investigators were less interested in what Carlos believed other people would say about his relationship with his mother, and far more interested in what the evidence was already showing them. By now, the contradictions were becoming clear. Carlos said he woke up, found his mother, called for help, and stayed outside. But the digital trail suggested movement he never accounted for.
On your phone itself, it also tracks your GPS locations. So I can track your entire track around your yard. So, I mean, some of the stuff you told me is true, and some of the stuff not so true. Like where all you went while you were on the phone. Because you were on the phone with 911 for a few minutes, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So it tracks everywhere you went the entire time you were on the phone and the entire time when you weren't on the phone.
I didn't go down by the lake. I could see it. I didn't go down there.
It tracks you all the way down there. GPS, I mean, it looks like they connect the dots the entire way.
Well, I don't remember being down there at all. I don't, because there's no reason for me to be down there.
At this point, Carlos's explanation begins to break. Where he sounded certain before, that certainty now starts to slip.
There's 3 cameras in the house.
Okay.
Found 3 cameras in the house. I actually found one of them.
Okay.
And then guess what else? What else do you think we could have found in the lake that day? I'm just trying to ask you, just to help me out here.
Yeah, I understand. And I don't know.
You don't know what else we could have found in there?
No, I'm going to assume her phone since she's got cameras.
Up to that point, Carlos had maintained that he found his mother after waking up and hearing the dogs. Now, for the first time, he began suggesting there were portions of the afternoon he couldn't account for.
I figured I blacked out, but apparently I was working in the yard, woke up down by the fire pit is, but I wasn't even near the fire pit when I was working. I was working all the way down by the front gate, getting the fence all ready to go, and before we started clearing it out. So I was working up there, and then all of a sudden I woke up down by the fireplace.
Because you know, we went to the whole house, no signs of anybody else in the house but you and your mom. I mean, completely no other signs. So the only person who could have done it was you.
I remember being in the garage with the sharpening the axe, like getting it ready to go. I even went out to go look at the fence line, hopped the fence, looked at the tree, blah blah blah. Did all that. Gotta figure out, okay, where am I cutting? What am I cutting? And then what part of the fence do I have to fix? Getting all that stuff ready, and then from then to there.
Because I mean, I want to help you try to remember because it helps me for case-wise for you. It's not out against you whatsoever. Maybe you had an argument, were you just mad at her about the situation?
No, there's nothing I remember anything about.
As detectives continued to press Carlos, he began describing arguments he'd had with Denise in the days leading up to the murder. And then a confrontation he said escalated shortly before they came home that day.
I don't remember, that's the thing, is I don't remember. I just remember that a couple days before, my mom was being very physically, verbally attacking. I mean, I think she yelled at me worse than I thought I deserved.
Was it that Friday or was that Saturday? It was probably Friday, the day before.
Probably Friday, yeah. I don't remember exactly the day, but it was worse than I thought was like really deserved. Because I thought it was just gonna be like maybe a whole hour's worth of her telling me she's disappointed, she's pissed off, blah, blah, blah. But I remember it being a whole, like, half a day. Like, I left my room, she's like, what the f*** you doing out?
Like we spoke, man, just honesty just gonna set you free, bro. Like I said, we do accidents, we don't mean to happen. You know what I mean?
Okay, I think it was about 30 minutes before we got home. Because I remember we resolved it when we got home. But my mom was starting to get really, really verbally abusive towards me about WTC. Because I was telling her maybe I did want to do it in August. And she let me have it, big time. She was calling me a disappointment again, and then was threatening to, like, no longer pay for any of my college and just kick me out immediately as soon as I turned 18. Which that's like normal things happen. Like, you turn 18, and then she was like saying stuff like, I hope you do bad, stuff like that. But it didn't escalate until I just was like, geez, calm down. because whenever I tell her to calm down,
You don't tell no woman to calm down.
I know. So
Come on, man.
so it was getting pretty bad. And I was like, geez, well, all right, calm down. I get the point. I understand, but I just think I need time. I do remember being in tears by the time that conversation ended, and by the time I was crying pretty heavy, she stopped. No, I don't remember anything from that day. Anything bad happening from that day.
By this point, Carlos was no longer describing a normal afternoon. He was describing a buildup, hurt, resentment, and an argument, he said, left him in tears. And then, as detectives kept pressing him, his account moves one step further from what he'd originally said happened to what he said he actually did next.
I don't have an exact memory of it, so I don't want to say.
Okay, the best of your memory.
Best of my memory, walked in the house with the axe, with not the intent of doing that, but I think my intent was kind of like, okay, Mom, I think we need to get to work, because it was getting kind of late. I don't know if something was said, because usually I try to talk to her. I'll say, hey, Mom, get up, we gotta go to work, or hey, Mom, gotta do some stuff. So I don't know if I did that and she made a remark that kind of pushed me over the edge, or if it just all played through.
So after you hit her with the axe, is that when you called 911 right after?
Immediately.
Right after you hit her?
Right after I went, bam, it was like, phone, 911, checked her breathing, pulse. But as soon as I saw blood running through her nose, I knew there was nothing I could do. So then I was just...
You feel bad you did it?
Excuse me?
You feel bad it happened?
Yeah, big time. And it's been killing me, eating me inside really bad.
I can imagine. You want to tell somebody, you can't.
Well, the thing is, I didn't want to tell the beginning because I didn't know exactly for a fact, and then after a while, it was just replaying in my head. I'm like.
By the end of the interrogation, the story Carlos started with no longer held. The nap, the barking dogs, the unknown intruder, the digital timeline, the items recovered from the lake, and Carlos's own changing account, including statements that placed him with the axe and described striking her. Investigators no longer believed this was an unknown intruder. They believed the evidence pointed straight back inside the home. Carlos Hallowell was eventually brought to trial, and on July 9th, 2021, after about 90 minutes of deliberation, a jury found him guilty of premeditated first-degree murder in the killing of his mother, Denise Hallowell. On September 14th, 2021, Carlos was sentenced to life in prison. But because Carlos was 17 years old at the time of the murder, Florida law allows his sentence to be reviewed in 2044. Not every case ends with understanding. Some end with facts, with evidence, and timelines. But the emotional truth, what actually existed between two people in the privacy of their own home, that part doesn't always leave a clear record behind. And on that still July afternoon, whatever been building inside that house finally broke. And sometimes that's the most unsettling part of it all.